We've been fighting a long time, and we have all lost so very much, so many loved ones gone. But you are not alone. There are pockets of resistance all around the planet. We are at the brink. You have no idea how important you are. If you're listening to this, you are the resistance.
Ave Maria Stella, Dei Mater Alma, atque semper Virgo, Felix te
Andre Marie coming to you from St. Benedict Center in Richmond, New Hampshire. Our websites are catholicism.org and reconquest.net. My email address, if you'd like to shoot me a very brief email with a recommendation, a question, or a comment, is bam@catholicism.org. That's bam@catholicism.org. You can find me on The Heresy of Americanism. And my guest is Mr. Steve Cunningham of Sensus Fidelium and the Resistance Podcast.
Brother, how you doing? Good to see you.
I'm doing well. How you doing?
Good, I'm well. And for those on my channel, I'm interviewing Brother Andre because he is the genius in this topic, not me.
Well, let's see how genius we actually get. So, in lieu of having an actual genius, I foolhardily agreed to take the interview. So this is kind of an interesting thing. It's a resistance podcast / reconquest amalgamation. So we'll see how this works.
Yes, I was telling Brother off camera, the resistance and then the reconquest. So for our viewers, you've heard Brother before, so now you see him. That's Brother who you see on the Reconquest podcast that we've done. Quite a few. They're fantastic, Brother, by the way. Thank you for all those. Obviously, we haven't done all of them because I need to eat. Yeah, I'd still be doing them all.
and also Mike Church would be a little upset if we took all the stuff from Veritas Network.
Yeah, I can't do
on your channel.
Yeah, how many? There's 300.
Well, this is number 245.
245. So yeah, we'll have all the links below in the show notes. Go check it out. Go check out all his interviews. I really don't know you've done a bad one. Even the regular podcast when he's by himself and he's just talking, it's very enlightening, and that's what we're trying to do, is to give the Catholics knowledge about the faith, and that's the whole purpose of what we're doing.
Great, thanks, Steve.
So
now everybody knows that I have a great face for radio, by the way, all of your viewers.
No, who am I to judge?
that line does come in occasionally handy, doesn't it?
Yeah, so today's topic, Americanism. Brother, I don't know why I didn't think about this before, and we've been doing these news podcasts on my channel, and we talk about it all the time. Just Brother and I probably chatted text for 3 or 4 years. It's the first time actually talking face to face on Zoom, face to face. But Americanism is a great topic. It's one of those that people talk about, but don't really know what it is. Kind of like communism. You hear somebody, "Oh, that's communistic." Not really. And so you hear, that's Americanist. Well, not really. So, Brother, can you enlighten us on what Barry said, Americanism 101? What is it?
Well, it was a group of errors, a sort of a constellation of errors that were condemned by Leo XIII in 1899 in an encyclical called Testem Benevolentiae. And basically, it was a sort of a rewrite of Catholicism for the American situation. And some of the errors in it included a downplaying of monasticism, an exaltation of the so-called active virtues over the so-called passive virtues. Leo himself says there's no such distinction, basing himself upon St. Thomas's ideas of virtue. He also condemns the idea that there's this sort of Protestant kind of approach to coming to God, the downplaying of the clergy. Mostly, though, it's a set of sort of values that holds up America as the model of the new religion, a new approach. And Leo actually explicitly downplays or explicitly condemns the Americanist downplaying of doctrine, that the Americanists took those doctrines which are most sort of offensive to the modern world and to the situation in America, and they downplayed them. And this, of course, kind of is made it kindred to modernism in a way. It had a lot in common with modernism, and a lot of the prominent Americanists who lived beyond the condemnation of Americanism became some of the early modernists in America. But not all of them were that sort of doctrinally radical. It really started as a movement among Anglo-American Catholics and Irish American Catholics who were kind of envious of the Anglo-Protestant superiority. They had an inferiority complex, and they wanted to make Catholicism in America different from Catholicism in Europe. Probably the best place to find the real understanding of Americanists that they had of themselves is not to read Testem Benevolentia, which is great. I'm not criticizing it. But if you want to know what the Americanists thought themselves, there's a letter. It's a very lengthy letter that was sent by Bishop. Let's see, his name is escaping me right now. There was a prominent Americanist bishop who was at one time the rector of the North American College in Rome, and he wrote a letter to Bishop Ireland, who was a prominent Americanist then in St. Paul. And this is, it was Bishop, John Ireland, of course, was the one in St. Paul, but it was Dennis J. O'Connell, who was the bishop, eventually became bishop of Richmond, Virginia. But he was rector of CUA, of Catholic University of America. But before that, he was the rector of the North American College in Rome. And while he was rector there, he wrote this letter about the Spanish-American War, right? The 1898 war. And in it, he talks about, in all this extremely insulting, bigoted language, he actually refers to Mediterranean Catholics as greasers. And he's talking about how the Americans need to go into this war. The Americanists were very much involved in encouraging the Anglo-American alliance and the Anglo-American hegemony that should dominate the world, which at the time was a crazy ambition, but it came to happen. So if you read that letter of O'Connell to Ireland, where he's basically saying, we have the duty to lead the world. We Americans have the duty to lead the world and to bring all that is good and noble and beautiful in America to replace all that's old and ugly and sort of stale and stifled and cramped in old Europe. It really is an eye-opener.
Is that kind of like the whole for English-speaking people, the shining star on the hill, or the new Atlantis idea?
Yeah, well, a lot of it. I mean, of course, when the Protestants came here, when the Pilgrims came here, and everything, they had themselves explicitly cast into this sort of Old Testament Jewish kind of light, that they were going to come and take the promised land, and they drive out all the Jebusites and the Ammonites and the Moabites and all these bad people who were the Indians, and that's why the Anglo-Americans treated the Indians so bad. But it wasn't quite as radical as that. I mean, there was Catholicism there, with this sort of weird Anglo-American veneer over it for the Americanist Catholics. And what they had envisioned was basically something great about the American enterprise that it could offer the church. A couple of important things to know about them. One, first of all, the first kind of notable Americanist would have been Father Hecker, and then his disciple, Father Eliot. And what occasioned Americanism being condemned was actually a biography of Father Hecker, written by Father Eliot. But it wasn't until it was translated into French with some inflammatory footnotes or introductions, I think it was a preface or an introduction by the translator, that made it most inflammatory, and that got the more conservative element in France really upset. And they besought Leo to make this condemnation. So Hecker was a convert from Protestantism. He became a Redemptorist. And there was something about the Redemptorists that he didn't like eventually. They were mostly Germans. There were some others. I think there were some Czechs, but they were mostly from Germany and Slavic countries, which had a very long Catholic pedigree and which were very old world. Well, Hecker was an Anglo-Protestant. And his conversion was, you would hope that it was total, but he was very certainly confused on what you might consider initially peripheral matters, cultural matters. But that really seeped into his religion too, because he wanted to downplay a lot of the old world aspects of Catholicism. Well, those old world aspects of Catholicism included things that are really part and parcel of the practice of our faith. The monastic life, the asceticism, a rich and vibrant liturgical life, such as the German immigrants in the Midwest frequently did have. A lot of the Irish that came over here had the disadvantage of being poor. Low mass is sort of their norm. And they didn't have the ability to build these gorgeous churches that the Germans, many of whom came over more affluent, could build. And they weren't into the solemn masses and all that stuff. So there was a downplaying. There was a will to vernacularize and things like that, and to sort of appease the Protestants of Anglo-America. There's another thing that needs to be kept in mind. Although Hecker was the first real Americanist, when you go back and look at the prelude to Americanism, there was a kind of a spirit that came over on the Ark and the Dove, that the two ships that came from England, when Lord Baltimore got the ability to found this colony that was called Baltimore, called Maryland, I should say, and with his title, Lord Baltimore, being the capital city, Baltimore, Maryland, which was sort of the center of the church in the United States. When he got permission to start this colony from the Crown, and he got the deal with the Crown whereby the English penal laws weren't enforced. This is, during colonial days, right? So English penal laws were in effect in England and in all of the American colonies, but they weren't going to be in effect in this new colony of Maryland. So these proto-American Catholics, these English Catholics who came over on the two ships, the Ark and the Dove, they ended up landing in Maryland. And what happened over time was they had this sort of ethos that we're happy to be tolerated. And they didn't work. Now, there were notable exceptions, Father White, the Jesuit, who did evangelize the Indians. But they were happy to be tolerated. They weren't extremely evangelical. And eventually what would happen, I think largely because of this, and this is a real morality lesson for us today, because they didn't seriously work to evangelize, eventually all of these Protestants from the Northeast settled in Maryland. And eventually the English penal laws went in force in Maryland, and in fact, the Cecil, the family of the Lords Baltimore eventually defected to Anglicanism, so that the original founders of the colony, their own ancestors, neglected the very practice of the faith. So this is a warning to us. If it's sort of like kill or be killed. And I know that doesn't sound charitable, but if you don't evangelize, if you don't work to evangelize, you're going to be evangelized, quote unquote, by something else. And if you're not, it's like this interior life. If you're not moving forward, you're moving backwards. If you're not growing in virtue, well, you're going to be acquiring vice, because we have to resist, right? As I think somebody's podcast.
Oh, if the salt loses flavor, it's only going to be trodden over.
Yeah. So there was this sort of prelude to the Americanist heresy as it really came to be in the late 19th century in early American English Catholicism. I emphasize that because the French missionaries and the Spanish missionaries are a totally different thing, right? A horse of a different color, if you will. But the other thing to keep in mind is that Bishop Carroll, who was the first bishop in the United States, was very much a new kind of bishop. He agitated for, first of all, he was very much liked by some of the Freemasons, who suggested that if you're going to have a bishop in the United States, it's got to be this guy. And he liked to be part of the sort of the cool kids club, and he hung out with these Freemasons. His own brother, Daniel Carroll, was a Freemason. And included among some of his interesting sort of non-Catholic tendencies was, one, he wanted to vernacularize the liturgy. Okay, as early as the founding years of our republic, he was agitating for a vernacular liturgy. He also had this weird penchant for advancing the cause of Freemasonry by saying, when he was asked about Freemasonry by a Catholic who was a Freemason, he said, well, I don't pretend that those decrees against Freemasonry have real authority in my diocese. Now, he's talking about decrees that came from the Roman Pontiff. He also had offended Bishop Briand of Quebec by going up to Quebec to try to recruit people into the revolution against the British Crown, which we can't forget that the French Catholics were grateful to the Crown for protecting their rights as Catholics in Quebec. He was really a kind of in a lot of ways, he was an Anglo-American sycophant, and that kind of sycophancy of the American ecclesiastical establishment for the Anglo-Protestant hegemony in the world, that's a theme that continues to this very day. It's a real thing.
If I'm not mistaken, then he and Franklin walk up from Baltimore to Quebec, and the Quebec bishop basically told anybody if they talked to him, you'll be excommunicated. He excommunicated Bishop Carroll. I think the excommunication lifted a decade ago. And that was what Franklin said, hey, well, we want this guy to be bishop because the whole trip, he didn't talk one time about religion.
Yeah, Franklin praised him because he didn't talk about religion. Exactly. And there was an excommunication that Bishop Briand issued. I'm not sure of the exact canonical status of the thing. But because he was named by the Holy See as the bishop, but he was Bishop Briand, who I think his cause for canonization has been introduced. Bishop Briand also forbade any of his clergy to allow then Father Carroll to offer mass in any of the churches in Quebec. So it was that just goes to show you what we're dealing with here.
As you said, things back then to now, I mean, how many of us bishops even would talk to a politician to become Catholic, i.e. Trump, i.e. name your, politician.
Yeah.
Even making the sign of a cross before prayers, just to not, I don't know, how would you say, irritate others? There's a guy, I just saw a news report of the guy downtown Charlotte, drives around on a bike every day yelling Jesus saves to people downtown. I go, man, imagine if we had that kind of fire. I know you guys do that.
Yeah, we engage in street evangelism. It's a it's a countercultural thing, and you've got to set your mind in a certain. You should acquire certain virtues. You have to have a certain disposition. Hey, I'm not here to be liked. I'm here to give the challenging message, but I have the truth behind me, right? But typical of that sort of downplaying of doctrine. I mean, just to quote Leo here, so everybody knows I'm not making this stuff up. Leo says in Testament Valentiae, Pope Leo XIII says that certain topics of doctrine are passed over as of lesser importance, or they are so softened that they do not retain the same sense as the church has always held. So there is this idea of we soft pedal the religion and we downplay it. And, so stuff like purgatory, the sacrificial nature of the Mass, the relics, veneration of relics, invocation of the saints. Certain things that are done in Europe with devotion to the saints, such as relics and stuff like that, kind of shock Anglo-Protestant sensibilities. And if that's a little bit embarrassing to us Catholics, well, shame on us. We need to man up as Catholics, or woman up, as it were, as Catholics, and not worry about offending them because they don't like it.
Yeah, I was told on the news show. So I wish that the nun, who was a great speech, by the way, would have said, "I wish all of you would convert to the one true faith, the Catholic Church, because I want you to all be saved."
Yeah, yeah, and I also wish that she hadn't said that our Lord was conceived of an unwed mother.
Yeah. I wasn't. I've brought up that topic quite a few times. I'm still getting backlash from it. So.
Yeah, okay. Sorry to cause you back.
No, bring it on. It's we need the Catholics to be Catholic. That's kind of like that's what we do with street evangelization as well. And my wife told me once, she said, let's just stop going after the Protestants and start worrying about the Catholics to get Catholics to be Catholic again. And then
you know, Steve, talking about evangelism, yeah, obviously getting Catholics to be Catholics might be harder. In theory, it shouldn't be, but I think so many Catholics, when you think you're Catholic and you're not, that's the frightening thing, because then you have to convince somebody, well, no, that's actually not Catholic. At least the non-Catholics who are non-Catholics in name realize they're not Catholics.
Right.
They have that advantage. But talking about evangelism, which I know that's a subject that's very dear to your heart, because, you know, I wear this habit. So when I go out, I have a sort of icebreaker for a conversation. You go out and you just start talking to people about the religion, which takes a lot of fortitude. It takes a lot of chutzpah, to quote members of another religion. But one of the things that Leo XIII condemned in Americanism specifically involved evangelism. He says this. He says, the way and the plan which Catholics have thus far employed to bring back those who disagree with them are proclaimed to be abandoned and to be replaced by another for the future. So this kind of futurism, this kind of America represents the wave of the future. This is something that it has in common with modernism. You know, people who are modern liberals and progressivists make their appeals to the future. Traditionalists make our appeals to the past. Now, it's not to say we live in the past. We should keep an eye on the future in the sense that we want to influence the future to make it better. But we as St. Paul says, tradidi quid accepi, right? I have passed on that which I myself received. That's the notion of tradition. These guys were more interested in altering the religion. I mean, you got to give the Americanists one thing. They did want to make America Catholic, which is interesting. They wanted to make America Catholic, but their error was that they first wanted to Americanize Catholicism so that America could be Catholicized. And you can't do that.
Well, it was more like let's kind of give them a softer version to see if they'll bite and then bring them in type idea.
Yeah. I mean, Father Hecker, or it was either Father Hecker or Father Elliot, two early Paulists. One of them said, you know, I realized at a certain point that I had been Catholic all my life. Well, really? I mean, what was that thing you did when you renounced heresy and you made a profession of Catholic faith in front of a Catholic priest? It's one thing to say that you had maybe seeds of the word. It's one thing, I mean, even pagan philosophers had that. It's one thing to say that there were things that were inching you on to Catholicism, and that, you know, maybe you had certain questions when you read the Bible and your answers to them were more Catholic than they were Protestant. But it's another thing to say that I was Catholic all along. The way that a lot of them spoke of their conversion was as if it was some sort of a lateral move and not going from darkness into light, not going from, you know, take a Johannine outlook on reality. You know, there's darkness and there's light. And yes, that's a black and white view, but that's the worldview of the fourth gospel, everybody. The darkness did not comprehend it. And if we're looking at the true faith in Jesus Christ as the light of the world, you're either in the darkness or you're in the light. And heresy is darkness. No matter how nice the heretics are, it's still darkness. The Catholic Church has the light. And, you know, we can say how many truths the Protestant religions teach, you know, if they believe in the Trinity or the Incarnation or whatever. And yeah, of course it's true when they say it. It's not a lie just because they say it. But what makes them heretics is where they differ from the Catholic Church, and that can't be overlooked. So this was and it got so bad that Leo says it raises a suspicion that there are those among you who envision and desire a church in America other than that which is in all the rest of the world. So that's, I mean, when you read that letter from Bishop O'Connell to Bishop Ireland, you will see in there this real hubris of basically we're starting I said that I may have said O'Donnell. I meant O'Connell. Sorry if I made that mistake.
You said O'Connor. Yeah, you said O'Connor.
I mess up these Irish names. I don't hate the Irish. I get confused with these O's and stuff. So sorry, Mr. Cunningham. I really apologize for that.
Let me hold it right there, Patrick.
But there was Leo himself had sent an earlier encyclical before Testament Benevolentia, about 4 or 5 years earlier. He sent a document, an encyclical letter called Longinque Oceani. And one of the things that he said in that, and this is where he has this beautiful expression talking about the footprints of the church in America, and he makes this beautiful little hat tip in it to all of the foreign missionaries who had come to the New World to evangelize it. And he says how wonderful this is. Keep in mind, this is a man who also wrote an encyclical praising Christopher Columbus because he had brought the faith to the New World. So he very much loved the church in America. But he said, and he gave a gentler warning in Longinque Oceani than he gave later in Testament Benevolentiae, even though Testament Benevolentiae was somewhat diplomatic in its wording. Now, in Longinque Oceani, he warns Americans to say, be grateful for what you've got. Be grateful for your freedoms to practice your faith, but don't fall into the error of thinking that the American ideal of religious liberty is the Catholic ideal. Don't fall into that error. So what he was seeing was that he was seeing American priests, American bishops thinking that this is the cat's meow, this new Anglo-American venture whereby we have a free church and a free state, and there's not this union of throne and altar, and we don't have this concept of Christendom whereby the civil power and the ecclesiastical power are so complementary to one another and involved in each other. This is an advantage. This is a good thing. They were proposing religious liberty along American lines as the ideal, and Leo said, no, it's not. Now, in saying that, of course, he was only reiterating in a more specific way what Blessed Pius IX had said in condemning liberalism, because what a lot of people don't realize is our modern notion of religious liberty has been condemned by the church under the name of liberalism. That's what liberalism is in the Catholic lexicon. It's not being a Democrat.
Could you explain just that? Error has no rights. What do you mean by religious liberty? Do we have, I've heard before that like in Spain and France, mainly Spain, Protestants couldn't go out and preach in public. Yeah. Only Catholics could do that. Now, I think J-dubs do that out there.
Yeah. Yes. So, and by the way, that was something that the CIA actually worked to make happen, believe it or not. And that's not some crazy conspiracy theory. It's documented. David Wemhoff's wonderful book on John Courtney Murray, Time, Life, and the American Experiment. I forget the full name of it. That book really is illuminating. He's using all kinds of information he got from freedom of access requests and special scholarly libraries and so forth. But the fundamental idea of Catholic social teaching vis-a-vis the church and the state is that the Catholic religion is to be given the pride of place. The Catholic religion is, once it's the religion of the people, the state itself, and actually even before it's the religion, the state as a moral person. So what's a moral person? A moral person is a group of people who come together for some common end, right? We've got you and I. We're physical persons. We have an actual natural personhood that we each have. But if you and I come together and form a club, right? Sort of the Reconquest Resistance Club,
R&R.
Yeah, the R&R. Then you can say that we're a moral person in as much as we're acting together for some common end. Well, the state is more than an ordinary moral person. It's not quite what the church is, which is a perfect society, but the state is close. And in a lot of respects, it has what needs to be called the perfect society, but it's not complete. So the state is a moral person. And as a moral person, it has certain obligations. It has certain duties. And one of those duties is to honor God. And one of those duties is to discern and to discover and to profess the truth about God, including whatever truth about him might be supernaturally revealed. So the state doesn't have the luxury to be neutral in matters of religion. Now, of course, when you're in a non-Catholic state, it's a disadvantage to Catholics to say this because there, you end up being under the England of the persecuting Anglican Church or something. But the fact is that the traditional teaching of Christendom is that when you're in Christendom, the state has a duty to safeguard, to protect, to advance the cause of religion, because it has a duty to glorify God and to work for the salvation of souls. So Leo knew this. Leo, this is the traditional teaching of the church, and this is what he would have advanced. But unfortunately, the clergy in the United States at the time, many of them, not all, certainly not all. In fact, there were notable exceptions, some of whom should be mentioned by name, at least one, Bishop Bernard McQuaid, who founded what they call the Rock, which is the seminary in upstate New York. He named it. Let's see, what's the name of that seminary? I think St. Bernard's. I think it's St. Bernard's Seminary. And his name was Bernie McQuaid, and he was a tough guy, and he was very anti-Americanist, and he specifically founded his seminary as an alternative to Catholic University of America. Because as I've said before, Bishop O'Connell was at one time rector of Catholic University of America. Catholic University of America was a hotbed for Americanism. And many of the bishops, many of whom were Irish, by the way, some of whom were German, who reacted against Americanism, they were fighting CUA. They were fighting Catholic University of America.
Yeah, you're thinking of Monsignor John Ryan, for example, that went after Von Sheen and really pushed the New Deal.
Yeah. They called him the Right Reverend New Dealer. Yeah.
Monsignor New Deal. Yeah, all kinds of names for him.
Yeah, and by the way, this penchant of the American clergy, many of the episcopacy, for big government, it goes back at least to Gibbons and Wilson. So, and it's very interesting because it's so telling. It's a cautionary tale when you look at Gibbons and Wilson. Wilson was an extremely bigoted anti-Catholic. He hated the Catholic Church. He's on record for saying that we'll never get anywhere in the Philippines until we get rid of all of the religious orders. He worked against Catholic interests everywhere. And of course, he was personally responsible for dismantling the last Catholic empire, whose head of state was Blessed Karl von Habsburg.
Yeah.
So this man was extremely anti-Catholic and hated Catholics and hated Catholicism. But he had this idea that the Anglo-Americans should form an alliance. The English and the Americans should form an alliance, and we'll rule the world. And this is what World War I was largely about. And after World War I, of course, he remaps Europe and creates these impossible states that are amalgamations of different people. And of course, everything sets the stage for World War II, right? For the Nazis and the commies to divide Europe all up. He created this vacuum when he destroyed these empires, and including the last Catholic empire. But Wilson had personal contempt for Catholic bishops. But if you read the correspondence between Cardinal Gibbons and Wilson, Gibbons was an utter sycophant. He was an utter sycophant to Wilson. He was a real bootlicker. And one time when he actually appeared to speak to President Wilson, Wilson didn't even invite him to sit down. He dispatched him in a few minutes and sent him away. And the 83-year-old Cardinal Gibbons was actually shaken when this happened. And he complained to Bishop Ireland, and Bishop Ireland said, well, he wouldn't do the same thing to me, only to have exactly the same thing happen to him when he went to go meet.
Famous last words.
Yes. But all the while they were defending the big government, war machine, big statism, lots of international wars to sort of impress this Anglo-American hegemony on the world, because this is our destiny. And you can see it in that letter I keep referring to Bishop Ireland from Bishop Dennis J. O'Connell, that talks about the greasers. And this is back in 1898, again, during the Spanish-American War. So you're dealing with a sycophantic sort of almost envious. They were envious of the Anglo-American power, and they wanted to sort of tap into that. That's what we had largely for bishops, at least among the Americanists. And this was a very unhealthy spirit. Now, you had a lot of people who were not part of that, people with a real Catholic spirit and a real evangelical spirit, and they stand out in stark contrast. Yeah,
I think of Frank Sheed, who's preaching in the middle of New York City in Central Park or the where was it? He was one of the big areas in New York City.
Yeah, I'm not sure where he went in New York, but he would speak publicly in a lot of places.
Yeah.
And you had you had great missionaries from overseas who would come here, and you had great American lay apostles who were going around. You had in New England, you had way back in colonial days, you had Father Thayer, who was whose family came over on the Mayflower. You had the Belgian Father Neerings in Kentucky. They call him the bluegrass apostle. You had Blessed Francis Xavier Selos, who worked in Maryland and various other places and ended up dying in my own natal city of New Orleans, where his relics are in this gorgeous reliquary in a church in the Irish Bayou section of New Orleans. So you had the Redemptorists, by the way. You had a bunch of really good Redemptorists. Of course, we have to mention Saint John Nepomucen Neumann, who was a contemporary of Blessed Francis Xavier Selos. These are the quality of men, the Redemptorists, that the Paulists sort of rebelled from and didn't want to be part of that. So there were notable exceptions on the other side. I named them earlier, Bishop Bernie McQuaid of, I think it was, forgetting which diocese it was it Ogdensburg? I don't know if it was Ogdensburg. That's the most northern bishopric in New York. I think it was Rochester, actually, Rochester, New York. So you had really good exceptions to this, but who opposed the doctrinal errors. And I think one thing that you didn't get enough of in America to offset it was monasticism, because frankly, that's one of the real answers to the Americanist errors, is monasticism. Because they had this idea, look, we're building a church, it's a new country. We need people to do active things. So they had all these teaching sisters, they had these nursing sisters, they had teaching brothers, there was secular clergy, but there was generally a downplaying of monasticism. Now you ended up, though, getting the Trappists coming here and various Benedictine groups coming here, and even Carmelites. And what we're seeing now, right now, Steve, is an explosion of Carmels that are traditional. Right, in this country.
Right.
You know some of them.
But even the Benedictines in Gower.
The Benedictines in Gower, exactly. This is one of the remedies to Americanism, because the big error of Americanism was this divide, aside from the political stuff and aside from the sort of the idea that the church in America is going to be new and something different than the church in Europe. One of the big errors is this downplaying of the interior life, the downplaying of monasticism, the downplaying of penance and vows, and at the expense, all of that was set aside to advance the so-called active virtues. So we're a country that focused on building. In this diocese, in the Manchester, New Hampshire diocese, there was a bishop named Bishop Brady, and Bishop Brady was one of the early bishops of Manchester, New Hampshire. And he was called Brady the Builder. So why? Because he built hospitals and schools and parishes galore. But this is what was going on, and unfortunately, what happened? It wasn't much later that all of those buildings got emptied of people, because I don't think they found the most important thing, which was the interior life of the faithful. It was the very superficial brand of religion that was being taught, and Americanism is incredibly superficial. It's an incredibly superficial religion. I've
heard that before. We have all these teaching religions coming up, but their interior lives were so bad that they basically just was teaching poorly, not poorly, I guess, but teaching enough error to kind of squash what could have been done.
And by the way, of course, I'm a teacher myself. I mean, we have a school. I'm not against teaching. I'm not against teaching sisters. I'm not against anybody, bring them on, the De La Salle brothers, the Xavier brothers, the Holy Cross brothers, and priests, and the various groups of sisters. It's wonderful. I come from New Orleans, and it's like in the old days, it was like a tropical aviary with all of these religious women in different habits walking around. And that's a great thing, but don't get rid of your Carmelites. Don't get rid of your cloistered Benedictines. Don't get rid of your Dominican nuns. Don't do that, because without that, the church doesn't have an interior. And I'm not to say that active religious don't pray. They have to. Otherwise, they leave. They lose their vocation. They lose their internal spirit. There is this thing called the soul of the apostolate, like that book says.
Heard of it.
But a wonderful book, and it was written by a Trappist. But when you do away with the cloistered form of the religious life, you lose so much of the Catholic life. And also another thing, and this is one of the great things about the current permutation of the traditionalist movement in America, it's becoming more and more liturgical. This is another thing that was downplayed: solemn masses and processions. And long ceremonies. Well, my goodness, why do you need all that music, and why do you have to have all that chant? And the melismas in the chant take too long. Just sing a good old hymn and then be done with it. That was part of the Americanist spirit as well. This minimalization of the church's sacred rites, which is why there's that book. I don't know if you ever read it, but it's called "Why Catholics Can't Sing," and it's kind of funny because it talks about this downplaying of the liturgical life that was kind of traditional in America, tradition with a small t, obviously. But now we're recapturing a lot of that stuff, and I think we're laying the foundations of a genuine renaissance in Catholic life here in America. And I know some people might think I'm nuts for saying that, but trust me, it is being built.
Well, especially with COVID 1984 rubrics, and a lot of people are flocking to, hey, where can we go? And it's really the diocese traditional priests that are open because they understand the meaning of souls, or the traditional orders that the people are flocking to because they're the only ones open. They're courageous enough to know that they're not going to die. Bodies aren't in the street, and their numbers are up. Their donations are up. Everything's sky high. So, in a way, it's growing because of this.
Yeah, I think so. And by the way, that keep in mind what I said before about the Americanist penchant for sycophancy towards the Anglo-American establishment. Well, we're seeing it with the bishops who are promoting the masks. It's like a new Catholic sacramental now.
Oh yeah, along with hand sanitizer. What's the prayer to bless hand sanitizer?
I don't know. Yeah, this is nuts, and I think there's a certain sense in which people see in authentic traditional Catholicism, because we believe in this, in faith and reason, being joined. We don't fall for every stupid thing that comes down the pipeline of our betters in the Anglo-American establishment. We don't think just because the Rockefeller Foundation spun it out that it's necessarily a good thing, or the Gates Foundation. Those same people that were running things back, in the 19th century, a lot of those same families, they're still around, and they're still causing problems.
Past is prologue.
They never was that.
Past is prologue.
Yeah, it is. It's a real prologue, and we're dealing with it now. There's a mass stupidity among the people that have been sort of socially conditioned. They become cultural conformists. And if you want to know what is the real modern, you might say, what is our patrimony of Americanism? What have we inherited today from the Americanists of the past? I would say it's this utter craven cultural conformism on the part not only of the clergy, upper clergy, lower clergy, but also of all of the Catholic faithful. And you see it in a family like the Kennedys, who certainly downplayed everything controversial and different about Catholicism, so that you would end up getting something that was agreeable to the dominant culture in which they found themselves.
Speak of the Houston speech.
Yeah, absolutely. That was an exercise in practical Americanism. Absolutely, where he assured a room full of Baptist ministers that his Catholicism would have nothing to do with the way he ran the country.
I think he even said he'd quit before he even did that.
Yeah. And I mean, this is the ascendancy of that family. Now, keep in mind that there was when old Joe Kennedy, the booze runner from Canada, right? He made a lot of money illegally during Prohibition. When old Joe Kennedy thought that he was going to get one of his sons in the White House, he wanted to make peace with the WASPs. This is at a time when Catholics were still sort of ghettoized in Boston. And a lot of Catholics have pejoratives, a lot of Catholics in Boston have pejoratives for the kind of Catholic who was a cultural conformist and a sycophant towards the Anglo-American establishment. What we call here in New England, the Blue Bloods, the Boston Blue Bloods. These are the Freemasonic families, the people like, let's see, what was his name? The Jesuit came from the famous Jesuit Avery Dulles, right?
Dulles, yeah.
So his uncle, his dad were big in the federal government, right, with the founding of the CIA and all this stuff. Well, it was families like that that kind of ran things in New England at the time, and you had others. You had the I'm trying to remember the people like the Rockefellers, families like that, really connected families, Harvard families, members of the Porcellian Club, and if they went to Yale, well, they were members of the Skull and Bones. These are the people who thought that the rest of us are just basically visitors in America.
Yeah, we're not on their team.
We are not on their team. I mean, they'll use us when they need us, but we're not on their team. Well, Joe Kennedy wanted his kids to get advanced into high office. Maybe we want them to become president one day. And he realized, I have to make my peace with the WASPs. And by the way, just to touch upon it, this is one of the factors behind the whole condemnation of Father Feeney, behind the whole, not anything beyond the mere local stuff that happened in Boston, but Cardinal Cushing, who was an Americanist to the T. Cardinal Cushing loved the idea that Kennedy would get, in the White House, and he didn't like the fact that there was this crazy Irish priest running around telling everybody you have to be Catholic. And that did not sit well, especially when a bunch of children of Boston Blue Bloods were actually converting, and you had prominent Freemasons whose kids are becoming Catholics. That's so contrary to the Americanist spirit. So that was not
It destroys the First Amendment.
Yes, exactly. So there are certain things that we hold to be sacrosanct as Americans that aren't at all sacrosanct, but there are certain things that we hold as Catholics that are sacrosanct that the Americanists sort of wanted to ditch. And I think that's the takeaway, that we have to be integral Catholics, and whatever is not in conformity with that has to be corrected. That's not to say that we hate the country. I mean, I think we should mention, Steve, that there is an overreaction in some circles against Americanism to the point where people actually hate America and they'll, sit down and, step on the flag or something like that. Well, that's never been the Catholic way. Leo the 13th said, even when he was criticizing the American Constitution as not the ideal for a Catholic state, even when he was criticizing it, he did say that it was an orderly republic.
Yeah.
So now, if you're a monarchist like I am, and certainly my friends, you don't think that that's the greatest value in the world. But Leo saw some value in it, and again, we don't need to be American exceptionalists and say it's the greatest country ever to love it. And if we love it, we work for its conversion.
Right.
And patriotism, this is the thing about American patriotism is, for us, America is an idea, and that's all wrong. That's not how a country's supposed to be. A country isn't an idea. A country is people. A country is a culture that those people share, and it begins in the family, and it radiates out to the local community, and then to the town or city or state, and then finally to this massive thing that's really big enough to be a large empire, the United States of America. You love it because you love your family. You love it because you love your neighbors. You don't love an abstraction, and you don't love a piece of paper. The worship of the Constitution, I think, is very ill-advised. I'm not saying we should trash it, by the way. It stands, in a certain sense, it stands between us and chaos. But we as Catholics, we respect law and we respect order. But we should realize, even if it's not our ideal, the reason we love the country is because it's our country. It's like the reason you love your father is because it's your father, not because he's the greatest dad in the world, but because he's your father. And, there's this fourth commandment thing that God gives us. So we have to love our country. And if you love it supernaturally, you want to share your faith with it. You want to evangelize it.
And you brought up teaching orders, a republic, Leo, Pius IX, and I think of some guy in Ecuador, in the state of Ecuador, Garcia Moreno, who Leo called the greatest Catholic government ever, and Pius IX called him a martyr. But what did he do? He brought in the teaching orders.
Yeah, he did.
He basically kicked out all the Protestants.
And he was actually for a lot of modern progress. He built roads.
Yes.
He did a lot of things in Ecuador that Ecuador needed. But his motto, it really encapsulates a true, proper Catholic idea of freedom. It's freedom for everyone and everything except evil and evildoers.
I got it on the back of my car.
Yeah, you probably, do you ever get your car, keyed at a parking lot?
Yeah, you should have seen the Planned Parenthood one I had. That got some looks.
We have to cultivate, I think, the spirit of Orestes Brownson. Orestes Brownson was a guy who went to a restaurant in New England. Now, he's a convert, right, from Presbyterian, well, actually from every form of Protestantism there was, because he kept hopping around. But finally, he ended up a transcendentalist. But he converted to Catholicism, and when he heard the Pope, I think at the time it was Pius IX, I think, saying that Catholics should be more militant in their public profession of their faith, Orestes Brownson hopped right on that bandwagon. And one day, it was a Friday, he was traveling in New England, which is deeply Protestant, especially at that time in the 19th century. And he's looking at the menu of the restaurant in this inn that he's staying in. And there's nothing that he can eat for fish. Everything's meat, right? All the entrees are meat. So he bangs his enormous paw on the table and makes a racket. And he shouts, he's a lion of a man, big beard and all that, big, huge frame. And he says, "Is there nothing in this establishment that a Christian can eat on a Friday?" And believe it or not, the waiter, runs, he's all a titter, runs back into the back room, and they found fish. And they cooked him some fish.
I think of Sheen's when he was on a plane or something, and back when you could actually eat on a plane. And he says something, "I'll have the sandwich." And the guy says, I can't remember if he's on a plane or a restaurant. "Well, that's no good today." "Well, I'll have this, but that's not good today." He finally figures out it's Friday. Oh, the waiter would help him out. Imagine a priest doing that today. It's, "Oh, yeah, you want the steak?" Blah, blah, okay, sure.
Yeah. I've heard of steak dinners and rectories on Friday nights.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we go. Garcia Moreno again. He was in correspondence with Pius IX. Just what should I do? Pray for me. Imagine he was president, even though Our Lady of Good Success, basically proclaimed that would happen. But imagine we get a president like that, or governor. Like that.
Yeah, I mean, we had Engelbert Dollfuss in Austria who did something similar. He had a private jet. He was a pilot, and or a private plane, and he would fly it to Rome to consult with Pius XI, to show him his plans for Austria. And of course, the Nazis whacked him off pretty quickly. But yeah, we could get the same thing in the United States. But Steve, we have to evangelize first. You can't have Catholic government until you have Catholics.
What is it true that the Second Vatican Council was the one that pushed Americanism globally?
Well, that's an arguable point. I would say, in effect, yes, but not necessarily in whether it's in the documents or not is
right. Not in the documents,
but certainly in its effect because of John Courtney Murray, who was one of the ones who reinterpreted the council afterwards. I mean, John Courtney Murray was one of the Paridi at Vatican II. He had been in ill repute with the church prior to that, right? There was an enormous fight in the Catholic press and the scholarly Catholic press in the United States during the 40s and mostly 50s involving John Courtney Murray and Monsignor Butch, as he was known, Monsignor Fenton. And Fenton was defending the traditional Catholic social teaching. Murray was pushing this new social teaching, which again goes back to the Americanist ideal of what was it? Well, freedom of religion. There's Americans are free to profess their religion, so is everybody else. And the condemnation of the idea that in a Catholic state, false religions cannot propagate themselves or have public cults. This is something that's part of Catholic tradition, and this was what was being lived in Spain and Italy and other places in the Catholic world, Latin America. Well, there was a concerted effort on the part of some American business interests, believe it or not, and some American, liberal Catholic interests. Their interests intersected. So once again, you have the Anglo sort of WASP establishment in cahoots with this fifth column within the church, and that fifth column in the church was largely Jesuit. John Courtney Murray, Gustav Weigel, these guys. And what they did was they helped to advance the cause of Americanism, again, as sort of rejuvenated Americanism in the church by way of altering the church's social teachings. And that was their goal at the council. Now, whether they succeeded in that goal or not is another question. But E. Michael Jones says they didn't succeed. But and Monsignor Fenton thought that the documents didn't officially teach error, but of course he wasn't happy with them either because of the ambiguities that he saw in them. So if it wasn't a complete victory for the Americanists, it wasn't a complete victory for Monsignor Fenton or Cardinal Ottaviani or any of the other ones who were trying to defend Catholic tradition. But that's how Americanism kept going. I mean, they had that book, The Rhine Flows into the Tiber. Well, I've heard people, my superiors...
It's got a new title now.
They could call it The Mississippi Flows into the Tiber because a lot of the influencers there were Americans, including Murray.
What are some practical ways to, erode that from people's mindset? I guess is the best way to ask. You got to change your mindset based on this. That the whole air has no rights. People don't like evangelizing because everyone thinks that it's the flavor of the month, or it's the Major League Baseball team. Hey, Catholics are the Yankees, Lutherans are the Red Sox. You know what I mean? It just goes down the list. How do we get that mindset that there's one and the rest are basically not that one?
Yeah, well, St. Paul says, be not conformed to this world, but be reformed in the newness of your mind. It's got to start in your mind. I realize I'm pointing to my brain, which is an organ, but the mind, which is super organic, that's where the change starts. And How are you going to do that? Well, I mean, there are great sources for Catholic tradition here. And the thing is, these books are all accessible now. I mean, if somebody wants to, one of the things I would recommend is people read Dom Guéranger's Liturgical Year. I know you're familiar with it. Why do I say that? Because Dom Guéranger's Liturgical Year isn't just a commentary on the liturgy for the sanctoral cycle and the annual cycle of Christ's mysteries. It's a whole library of Catholic erudition. And he's got a lot of the church's social teaching in there. Every time he comes upon a king saint, he generally has something to say about politics, and not politics in the sense in which it's used in electoral politics in modern republics and democracies, but politics in the sense of how a society ought to be governed. And Dom Guéranger is great at dealing with those questions in the context of a life of a saint, or in the context of something else, like he might even be talking about Christ before Pilate, and then he goes on to he goes from something profoundly, deeply spiritual to something very practical in the social order. And he shows you how it is all of a piece. And that's the thing. The Catholic faith is a beautiful, seamless garment, right? I mean, Cardinal Burton took that and did horrible things with it. But the true seamless garment is Catholic doctrine. It's all of a piece. And when we look at the social teaching in the context of the Church's liturgy, and when we look at it in the context of the lives of the saints, and we look at evangelism in the context of the lives of the saints, and see how they did it and what they did, well, to me, that helps to bring that newness to your mind that St. Paul's talking about. So we realize, okay, well, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have these precursors, these people, this cloud of witnesses over our heads, to use another Pauline image, who can tell us how to do this stuff. And of course, we have to apply it in our modern setting, obviously. Nobody's going to sit here and pretend that we live in the Middle Ages. Nobody's going to pretend that we live in the Renaissance or the Baroque era during the Counter-Reformation. You and I are using this technology here that's very modern, We're not trying to communicate through an abacus. But you take what they did and you say, well, how do we apply that in our modern situation? And you know what? People are doing it. I mean, you're doing it. Other people are doing it. And it works. You get converts.
Yeah, even, not to say the COVID 1984 thing again, but during Holy Week, we had 100,000 people watch the pre-55 Holy Week. Protestants alike with Catholics who've never seen a solemn high mass. Protestants are going, what is this? Catholics are even saying what it's just drawn to the beauty of what they saw. Even in I just went to in Tenebrae, we had 15,000 people watching.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, this is how God works good out of evil, right? So it was evil that people couldn't go to these ceremonies in person the way they're meant to be. But the fact is, if that got people who would never had an occasion to see it, exposure to it and exposure to the truth of the Catholic faith and its beauty, we have to realize, you got these three transcendentals that we talk about: truth, beauty, and goodness. Not everybody has the same entree into the church. Not everybody's going to be convinced by a book of Catholic apologetics. But the goodness of the lives of the saints, for instance, that can convince people. I know somebody who's converted by reading about Saint Therese. These kind of things can move people to conversion, or the beauty of the liturgy, the beauty of Tenebrae or Vespers or Compline. These things do have an attraction to them, and God's grace works through people's individual temperaments and mindsets and so forth. But the thing is, we just need to do this stuff to bring people in proximity with the faith instead of being embarrassed about it, Yeah, that's it. Everyone's, we'll use this example. Everything that's going on, people are not afraid to go out there, especially on social media, and give their 2 cents about what's going on in the world. But do you see anybody talking about, hey, you should become Catholic because X, Y, Z? Invite them to Mass. Give them a rosary. We were at a hospital the other day, and
the lady was saw my wife's rosary, and she started asking, "Are you Catholic?" We ended up giving her a miraculous medal. Have a miraculous medal on hand.
Yeah. I mean, Saint Maximilian Kolbe called the miraculous medals his bullets. And he said something interesting. He said anybody that accepts a miraculous medal, to the degree that he's accepted it, in that little degree, he has accepted the queenship of Mary over himself. Now, we don't know what it's going to lead to eventually, but we in our evangelistic work, we've had people contact us and say, "I'm Catholic now."
Yeah.
So we spread our Catholic books, and we also give away Catholic sacramentals. And a lot of it's nudging Catholics to get back to Mass, get back to confession. And the interesting thing is, what happens is when we walk into a place, a public place, wearing our habits with Catholic books and Catholic sacramentals, this occasions conversations. And people are interested in religion. A lot of people say, well, nobody cares about this stuff. No, it's quite to the contrary. Anybody who thinks that is probably living his life in an ivory tower or never bothers to talk religion with people. You start a religious conversation in public, you're going to get people nosing in. At the very least, they're going to be eavesdropping.
Right.
And you can actually converse with people and get them to talk about religion. And why not? Why not engage? Everybody has reason, right? Everybody has the faculty of reason. Not everybody uses it well, but when they're not Catholics, you can make certain appeals to them. And right now, the country's going to hell in a handbasket, and we need Catholic moral teaching. The United States of America has absolutely no chance at all to go back to the Eisenhower years. We can't go back to that weird amalgam where Catholics and Protestants and Jews sort of agreed on a lot of the bigger moral questions. That is not something we're going to go back to. It's impossible. Why? Because all the Protestant sects hit the pedal to the metal and became completely nuts on moral teachings as well as doctrinal teachings. They went even further from us. Ditto for the Jews as far as moral teachings, except for some, certain Orthodox or Hasidic sects or something. But by and large, that sort of American synthesis that you had in Eisenhower's years, where everybody kind of had this general agreement on a lot of moral questions, that's gone, and it cannot be revived. And that, in a way, that's providential, because right now, America needs the Catholic Church's moral teachings just to survive. How are you going to get decent race relations? Well, forget race and look at the one thing that can unify man. And it's not the Constitution, and it's not the Star-Spangled Banner, and it's not even Donald Trump. The one thing that's capable of uniting men is the mystical body of Christ, because it's a supernatural, supranational organization. And it has the grace and the interior power to unite men into an actual union of charity, right? Not just national fellowship, but theological charity based upon faith, right? So without that, America, I think, is doomed, because she's not going to get over this. She's not going to return to, what she once was, when you had this sort of mere Christianity that was the common religion in America. You're not going to get it. It's gone. And in a way, and I'm not saying it is a good thing, because it's creating a situation where Catholics are going to have to rise to the occasion and say, all right, even just to save the social order, we have to give our countrymen the faith.
Kind of like a reconquest.
Yeah, a reconquista. Yeah, you resist, and then we launch the reconquest.
I think of Dagger John's quote about we're supposed to convert literally everybody: the Navy, the Army, the Congress, the presidency, you name it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was, you're talking about the Bishop of
New York,
right? Yeah, and he was he fought the know-nothings, right? This is a guy who had some fortitude. And this is something that we need to emulate, instead of this quiet sort of tamped down, inoffensive sort of Catholicism. That's got to go.
Amen to that, brother. Appreciate it. Hey, can you give everybody your website and some things about it in the store, like MP3s, etc., to learn more about the faith?
Oh, okay, yeah. Catholicism.org is our website, and we have a store that's attached to it, store.catholicism.org, and you can get MP3s on whole courses of philosophy, scripture. There's a lot of books, and we just added Dr. Krasnevsky's new book on the liturgy today, so that's good. So you can download lots of stuff that I've given, lots of lectures that I've given, but also my mentor, Brother Francis. He was a great lecturer in philosophy, and you can find that there too.
Pretty much the best philosophy course I've ever heard. So check it out. We'll have the show notes with the link in the show notes below. And brother, again, appreciate you.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate you very much and all the good work you do. God bless you.
Yes, sir.